Good morning and happy Sabbath, Windsor Church. Now, I mention and I refer to the youth a lot in this presentation, in this talk this morning, but this message is for everybody. Oh, that young men and women might appreciate the high destiny to which they are called. Ponder well the paths of your feet. Begin your work with high and holy purpose, and be determined that through the power of the grace of God, you will not diverge from the path of rectitude. This was written by Ellen White, an author and also a leading figure in the founding of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and she wrote this in her book, Messages to Young People. Called to a high destiny. However, as it is written, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, and what no human mind has conceived, the things God has prepared for those who love him. These are the things God has revealed to us by his Spirit. The Spirit searches all things, even the deep things of God, which was lovely read in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 9 to 10.
The reason why they made this one, to make the journey easy and faster. So, the men do palm one tapping, and the women also grow cassavas and all those kind of food items.
My name is Richie, and here is, this place is called Izulazu Village. Now, my role here, I'm the king representative, and also I'm here as a historian.
Enzulazo Village, Western Region, Ghana, West Africa. To get to Enzulazo, we took a 6-hour bus trip from Accra, the capital of Ghana, to Takoradi, one of the large cities in Ghana. Then, from Takoradi, we were driven another 2 hours to get to Enzulazo. When we arrived, as you saw on the video, we were greeted by a boy who was making necklaces out of water lilies. We then got inside canoes, which took us on a journey to the village, which, as you saw, is built above the water. On the way there, we were captivated by the luscious greenery of the jungle and the quiet beauty of the expansive lake. We cannot box God in. Through this experience, it was made clear to me that there are moments God has appointed in our lives to make us feel alive and connected to the source, God, Jehovah. God wants us to go to a new place that Catherine Hart Weber, who is a Christian psychologist, describes as spacious and full of peace and hope. Not an old place, full of old experiences, fearful thoughts, and false beliefs. You cannot box God in when it comes to discerning what your destiny is. God declares in Isaiah that his thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways his ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are his ways higher than your ways, and his thoughts than your thoughts. It will take initiative and growth on our parts to begin to claim the high destiny God has for each of us. Pastor Michael Todd from Transformation Church observes, God is not limited by our small thinking. He is limited by our small obedience. As I was sitting on that canoe in Enzulaison, overlooking the vast lake, and then walking through the village above the water, and learning about the way of life there through listening and engaging, what I knew for sure was that I was at a new place, not an old place full of old experiences, fearful thoughts, and false beliefs. I had taken initiative to be there and seek out this place, and I'd been open to growth. As I was away from my usual routine, surroundings, and objects, a particular scripture became very real to me. And I believe that in order to heed our calling as youth and as people to a high destiny, we must understand these words of wisdom. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Enzulaison renewed my mind. Do not limit the will of God, because there is no room for that when we are called to a high destiny. And how, as youth and as people, can we put this into practice? Faith. In honor of International Women's Day, which was celebrated last Sunday, let's talk about the faith of these 5 inspiring women. Rahab was clever and wise, and her story is found in the book of Joshua. She was in the lowest profession for a woman at that time, which was a prostitute. But as soon as she heard what God had done for the Israelites, bringing them out of slavery, she risked her life in an act of faith by hiding the spies that Joshua had sent. Although women in the ancient world could not easily, if at all, become political leaders, Deborah was just the leader that Israel needed. Deborah was the only female to hold the position of judge in Israel. She was also a prophetess who, by being called to a high destiny, was able to assemble the people and enable them to cast off foreign oppression. See Judges chapter 4 and 5. This next woman is not even given a name in the Bible. We know her as the woman with an issue of blood. However, we should remember her as the woman who was desperate for healing and ignored the protocols of the day just for the chance to touch Jesus' cloak. And you can read this incredible story in Matthew chapter 5. In 2 Kings chapter 4, we read of a widow who, without questioning Elisha's instructions, collected many jars and filled them to the brim with only a small jar of olive oil. Such was her tremendous faith that she was able to act quickly to prevent her sons being taken into slavery to pay a debt. Another woman who is not identified by name in the Bible is the Samaritan woman at the well, who, according to John chapter 4, verse 39, caused many Samaritans in that town to believe that Jesus, the Messiah, had come. She did this confidently, by proclaiming her testimony that Jesus at the well had told her everything she had ever done. Faith sees what your physical eyes can never see. Faith knows what your natural mind can never comprehend. Faith possesses what your physical arms can never hold. Faith says yes to everything God declares to be true. Faith stands upon everything God says is certain. It leans upon everything God says is unmovable. And it counts on everything God says will come to pass. Roy Lesson, Jewish Christian author.
Got my mind made up that I will always show you the positive side of the motherland. Because I've seen people scared of going to Africa. I've seen people don't even wanna sit close to an African because of the images of Africa out there on the internet. And I am doing my best, bringing a lot of African YouTubers together to show only the positive side of the continent, so that Africa will attract investors, so that Africa will attract visitors, so that Africa will be the place that all of us want it to be. There is negative side of Africa too, and I know it, but I'm not here to show you. And those of you who are out there saying that, oh, you need to balance the equation by showing us the negative part of Africa, brother, if you don't have solution for any problem, don't talk about it. You know, I just got tired of Africans always complaining, but no single solution. Don't be that African who complains and never finds solution.
And what he says applies to all of us. Wodamaya is a young freelance vlogger from Ghana who is on a mission to change the African negative narratives by promoting all the African countries in a positive way, hence his mission statement, Africa to the world. I've included him in this conversation because, like the 5 biblical women of faith, Rahab, Deborah, the woman desperate for healing, the widow, the Samaritan woman at the well, in addition to the many individuals in the Bible who demonstrated such faith, Wodamaya did not limit his destiny by letting it be overwhelmed by a focus on negativity and the problems. He has had faith in his calling to portray the richness of Africa's diverse peoples and cultures. And because of that, he is succeeding in his mission. If you don't have a solution, don't talk about it. These may sound like harsh words, but they need to be heard and understood if, as youth and people, we want to claim our high destiny. What are our solutions? We can make a plethora of excuses as to why we are not seeking out the higher destinies God has placed in our hearts, such as believing that the resources or skills that we have are not enough, worrying that our higher destinies will not please the people we try so desperately to please. But don't we already know that God can do anything, far more than you could ever imagine, or guess, or request in your wildest dreams? He does it not by pushing us around, but by working within us, his Spirit, deeply and gently within us. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20. Be still, be alone. In order to be called to our high destinies, at times we need to be quiet, be still, be alone. As youth and people, this can be very difficult with constant distractions and noise that comes from social media, others, and even the built environment around us. Shopping centres, roads, workplaces. I think it is important that as youth, we become comfortable in knowing that it is okay to be alone at times. Jesus was alone when he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted, and alone there where he fasted for 40 days and 40 nights in Matthew chapter 4. Jesus at Gethsemane was alone when he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will," in Matthew chapter 26. And also in our Sabbath school lesson this morning, youth, we heard about Elijah who was alone and he heard the still and small voice of God on the mountaintop. If we can be quiet, be still, and be alone when we need to be, we can correctly discern what God's will for our high destiny is. I think it is important that as youth we overcome the fear of missing out. It is good to enjoy our youth, but there is a time for everything, as we are told in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, such as a time to be born and a time to die, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to be silent and a time to speak. In order to claim our high destiny, we have to be serious sometimes. This is okay too. Your life is serious. Jesus was serious-minded, and he mixed with the low, the high, the middle, all classes. If the touch of the Lord does not change you, nothing will. Nothing will fill that void. No fame, no people, no things, which easily take us away from being quiet, being still, and being alone when we need to be. When we are not able to discern our higher calling, we can be described, as it says in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 13 to 14, as infants or lacking maturity, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching. As youth and people, sometimes we don't even know our own minds, or we do, but we choose to ignore good judgment or exercise self-control. Be intentional with your destiny. Intentional, meaning done with intention or on purpose. In what ways do we be intentional? We can intentionally arrange our lives around regular rhythms of positive habits and spiritual practices, because it is discipline that will take us where God wants us to go and where he has willed for us to go. Rhythms, positive habits, and spiritual practices are what we need to implement. Let us not limit our high destiny by letting it be overcome by a lack of discipline. Speaking of spiritual practices, one example could be attending church regularly. And this is the Prince Emmanuel Seventh-day Adventist Church in Accra, Ghana, where we visited, and we were welcomed warmly by the congregation there. Or it could be listening and making time for the elderly. And here's a picture of myself and my siblings with my grandmother, who is 92. We can intentionally water our seed. Let us be grateful, meaning thankful, appreciative for the person God has created us to be. Let us be grateful with the life we have been chosen to live. let us be grateful for the unique personalities and gifts that we have been given. Let us not fall prey to comparison, envy, jealousy, or put-downs towards ourselves or others. What you may see as a weakness now may be the strength that will be used in your higher destiny, because whatever we do is for the glory of God, not man. Let it be our mantra, for I am not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that they may be saved. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 33. We can intentionally align all our decisions with our core beliefs and values. I believe that it can be our core beliefs and values that God will align our highest destiny with.
Took them over 100 years to build the castle, using bent bricks, oyster shells. They used the slaves in building the castles. Named Bartholomew de las Casas, introduced Africans to them. He had been to Africa before, seeing how strong the Africans were. And the first batch of slaves they took to the Americas, indeed, they were strong. So they came in and took more of these slaves to the Americas, to the Caribbeans, to go and work.
300 years.
The door you see here is over 250 years old and still counting. Built around the 17th.
Said all my people spiritual, only one way. Daba wale, Jacko wakbe. Oh, spiritual, highly spiritual. Oh man, da. Gotta know me now holding back. Oh, spirit.
In order to integrate and to understand how we can integrate better, I was asking what you all would like to learn from us. You know, what would help us, because we have to teach each other.
And the message from Berna, I believe, would be that every Black person should please remember that you were Africans before you became anything else.
African Americans were Africans, specifically from the western region of Africa, before they lost their identities through the transatlantic slave trade between the 17th and 19th centuries. Cape Coast Castle, as you saw, is a World Heritage Site located at the Cape Coast in the central region of Ghana. It is a castle that was built by African slaves and then used as a tool to degrade their value to that of less than a human being. There was a church built above one of the dungeons. The same governors and officials who attended the church and ran the castle were the same governors and officials that would violate the women being held in the dungeons. The dungeons were very poorly, if at all, ventilated, and the slaves were forced to sleep and toilet in them. They would stay here for several weeks to months at a time, if they didn't die, before they would be taken through the door of no return and herded onto the ships. Intentionally aligning all our decisions with our core beliefs and values. Justice is a very important core value of mine, and it is one that I have seen God set apart from the other beliefs and values that I hold. It can be our core beliefs and values that God will align our highest destiny with. What are the beliefs and values that speak strongly to you? And how do they inform the work that you do or aspire to do? The friends you choose to surround yourself with, and how you relate to others. Reading from the Message, Ephesians chapter 5, verses 1 to 2. Watch what God does, and then you do it. Like children who learn proper behavior from their parents. Mostly what God does is love you. Keep company with him and learn a life of love. Observe how Christ loved us. His love is not cautious, but extravagant. He doesn't love in order to get something from us, but to give everything of himself to us. Love like that. Catherine Hart Weber, a Christian psychologist, says, the most important human need in order to flourish, live out our highest destiny, is to be loved. Our relationship with God and others is what life and love are all about. If we don't have love, we cannot flourish. We search for love throughout our lives, often looking in the wrong places and trying to satisfy our deep longing for real love and fulfillment with shallow substitutes. Married at First Sight and Love Island are modern-day examples of the human desire for eternal love, which feed into the psyche of the public. Programs such as those commercialize love, waters love down, and in a way makes love cheap. Another way to describe our most important human need is the need to be heard. This is how Oprah describes it. And all over the world, people everywhere of all ages just want to be heard, to be seen, and to be cared for. The power of the human story. We all have one. I've included these images that were taken at Abri Gardens, the botanical gardens in the eastern region of Ghana. Some of the trees are as old as 96 years, even older. This particular tree has died, but has been transformed by hand. Themes of the human story are being carved into its trunk and branches. We see people and wildlife climbing on the backs of others, people suffering, and also people being victorious. In our journeys to a higher destiny, it is important to remember the true love that comes from knowing Jehovah God, and the essential need of people for love and to be heard. How can we make people feel heard, seen, and cared for in our own way, however ordinary? Why would we want to accept our calling to a higher destiny? Well, in Psalm chapter 92, verses 12 to 15, we are told that the righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon, planted in the house of the Lord. They will flourish in the courts of our God. They will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green, proclaiming the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no wickedness in him. But I think the answer in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11 is fitting for today. And this is my sister's favorite verse. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Let's go back to when we opened this conversation with Ellen White to the youth. She says, "Oh, that young men and women might appreciate the high destiny to which they are called. Ponder well the paths of your feet. Begin your work with high and holy purpose, and be determined that through the power of the grace of God, you will not diverge from the path of rectitude." Let's look at what this means in light of our talk today, so that there is no doubt about what we can do when we leave from here. First, Ellen White says, to appreciate the high destiny to which we are called. This means we have to identify what our destiny is. But what if we don't know what that is? Because many of us don't. She goes on to say, ponder well the paths of your feet. This is the starting point of figuring out what your higher destiny is. We must think about what we believe that to be. We discussed earlier about being quiet, being still, and being alone when we need to be, which can help us discern what it is that we truly feel called to do, which may change through different stages of life. We talked about positive habits, spiritual practices, gratitude, and beliefs and values which can inform the steps that we take. I invite us all to think about this throughout today. She also says to begin our work with high and holy purpose, meaning consult with God about what you believe your calling is, to align your will with God's will. Alternatively, if we don't know what our calling is, we can begin by asking God and looking for his clues. It is important to remember that we cannot box God in when it comes to the work God can call us to do. Finally, she calls the youth to be determined, or we could say to have faith, that through the power of the grace of God, you will not diverge from the path of rectitude. Rectitude refers to morally correct thinking or behavior. Whilst we may diverge, the important thing is that we return, and we can, because God is a just God, a God of love, mercy, and grace. Through all things, we should never forget that God's will is the only will that matters. And this is a poignant declaration that Martin Luther King Jr. makes in his speech, "I've been to the mountaintop," which I will now play.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the great, if not the greatest, civil rights leaders of the modern times. And he was also a Baptist minister. He was actually assassinated the day after he presented this in 1968. enter youth through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. What no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, and what no human mind has conceived, the things God has prepared for those who love him. These are the things God has revealed to us by his Spirit. The Spirit searches all things, even the deep things of God, called to a high destiny. Thank you.